Have you ever wondered what secrets the forest keeps buried beneath its roots? Daniel Carter, a war veteran haunted by the past, thought he had nothing left but his loyal dog, Rex. Yet one cold morning, Rex froze in the trees, ears sharp, body tense, then began digging furiously at the mossy ground. What he unearthed wasn't just a stone. It was a fragment of something ancient, something that whispered of lives long forgotten. From that moment, Daniel's quiet life was over, because what his dog uncovered in the mountains would unravel a truth, darker, deeper, and more heartbreaking than anyone could imagine. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. The early autumn morning in the Appalachian Mountains carried a thin veil of mist, curling around the pines like faded breath, and the air was sharp with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Sunlight had not yet broken through. Only a faint golden glow lingered behind the ridges, promising warmth later in the day. Daniel Carter sat on the sagging porch of a cabin that looked older than its keeper, a structure of warped boards and weather-beaten shingles that leaned into the hillside as if exhausted by decades of storms. Daniel himself fit the cabin in every way. At 45 years old, his body bore the weight of a soldier's years, but in his eyes, hazel eyes that once scanned horizons for danger, there was the weariness of a man who no longer expected much from the future. He wore jeans faded almost to gray, a beige shirt with seams fraying at the shoulders, and a pair of brown boots scuffed by both deserts and forests. His hair, hazel brown touched with sun-bleached strands, curled loosely and unkempt above a face marked by a short, rough beard streaked with silver. The beard was not carefully trimmed. It was a sign of neglect, of a man too tired to care about neatness. Every line around his eyes seemed to have been etched by sleepless nights. The years of service in Iraq had left scars that did not always show. In the noise of battle, Daniel had been steady. Commanders once praised his calmness under fire, his quick instincts when the road ahead was mined, or when the enemy's shadow appeared beyond broken walls. But war never really ended. It only returned with silence. Daniel carried an echo of the battlefield inside him, sudden startles at night, sweat dripping as he dreamed of comrades who never came home. He tried to push it away by isolating himself, by keeping distance from people, by hiding in this cabin that belonged once to his parents and now to a man who didn't know if he belonged anywhere at all. On the wooden porch beside him lay his constant companion, Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd whose coat was a mix of sable brown and black, gleaming faintly even in the muted dawn. Rex was a large dog, strong in the shoulders and long in stride, his eyes alert with intelligence. His ears twitched at the faintest forest sound, the flutter of a jay, the rustle of a squirrel, the far-off crack of a branch under deer hooves. His body, though muscular, carried a few scars from training and rough living. Daniel had brought him back from the army years before, when Rex was still a pup destined for service. Rex had never seen combat, but he had seen his master in broken states and had guarded him through nights when the veteran's breathing turned ragged from nightmares. Loyalty seemed etched in every muscle of Rex's frame, his very presence a reassurance that Daniel was not truly alone. Daniel's mornings began in silence. He drank black coffee, staring at the fog between the trees, while Rex sniffed the yard, tail sweeping back and forth. But this morning, Daniel's mind wandered deeper than usual. He thought of the man he had been. Once, he had been sharp, the kind of soldier others relied on. He had a wife back then. Her name was Emily, a school teacher with auburn hair and a laugh that lifted the heaviness of any room. She had endured his deployments, written him letters filled with hope. But the years dragged on, and when he returned for good, Emily could not endure the person who came back in his place. Daniel had been hollow, quick to anger, restless at night, unable to hold down a steady job. Emily left 3 years ago, saying she needed air to breathe. He hadn't seen her since. The house they had shared was sold. He ended up here, back in the wooden cabin where he had been raised, as if life had turned full circle only to mock him. He looked at his hands, scarred from barbed wire, calloused from years of lifting rifles and later from hauling lumber for day wages. These were not the hands of a man who built futures anymore. They were hands that patched broken fences, cut firewood, fixed roofs for neighbors when they needed help, but never invited him in for dinner. He told himself he didn't mind. But sometimes, when the mountain grew too quiet, the silence pressed against him like a weight, and he wondered if he had already been forgotten by the world. Rex padded back onto the porch and nudged his master's boot with a wet nose. Daniel looked down and managed a half smile. "You're still here, buddy," he muttered, reaching to scratch behind the dog's ear. Rex's tail thumped once against the floorboard. The dog had a way of pulling him out of the abyss, even just for a moment. It had become Rex's peculiar habit to disappear into the woods each day, only to return with something clenched in his jaw. Sometimes it was a branch stripped of bark, other times a bone left by coyotes, and often oddly shaped rocks. Daniel had piled them in a corner of the porch, a growing mound of forest debris that looked like a child's collection. He had never taken them seriously, dismissing it as the instinct of a dog looking for play. Yet, in the back of his mind, he sometimes wondered why Rex kept returning to the same spot deeper in the forest. Dogs, after all, didn't collect things for no reason. The wind shifted, carrying a cool edge from the ridge. Daniel sipped the last of his coffee, grimacing at the bitterness, and leaned back in the creaking chair. He thought about work waiting for him, splitting logs, repairing a neighbor's fence for $20, enough maybe to buy canned soup and more coffee. He hated the feeling of living day to day, but pride kept him from asking for help. He had been a sergeant once, giving orders, trusted by men who would follow him through fire. Now, he was a man others looked at with a mix of pity and judgment. That contrast gnawed at him like a constant ache. As he sat in reflection, Rex barked suddenly, sharp and insistent, and bounded off the porch toward the tree line. Daniel sighed, pushing himself up with a stiffness in his knees, and followed. "What now, boy?" he called. His voice sounded tired, even to his own ears. The forest wrapped around him as he stepped past the clearing. Pines rose like sentinels, their trunks black against the fog, while golden leaves of maples flickered where the light touched. Rex was already nose deep in the ground, paws working furiously to dig at something beneath a blanket of moss. Daniel frowned, walking closer, boots crunching over damp leaves. When Rex finally lifted his head, his muzzle was smeared with dirt, and between his teeth he clamped something that looked like a stone, but not like any Daniel had seen before. It was smooth on one side, strangely marked. Rex patted over and dropped it heavily onto the forest floor, wagging his tail with satisfaction, then stepped back as if presenting a gift. Daniel bent down, picking it up. At first glance, it was just another rock, the kind he had tossed aside many times before. But as the mist thinned and light fell across its surface, he saw faint lines, etched grooves that curved deliberately, forming patterns too precise to be shaped by chance. He ran his thumb over it, frowning. The grooves caught against his skin like old scars. Rex stood watching him, chest rising and falling, eyes fixed with the intensity of one who knew he had delivered something important. Daniel's heart gave a reluctant thud. For a moment, memories stirred the desert sands of Iraq, where men had unearthed relics buried under ruins, where each object told a story of lives once lived and now gone. He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. This was the Appalachians, not Mesopotamia. Rocks were just rocks. Still, as he turned the object in his palm, a quiet unease settled over him. Why did it feel different? Why did Rex bring it here, tail wagging as though expecting recognition? Daniel glanced at the pile of other stones back at the cabin porch and felt a chill run down his spine. How many had he ignored without looking closely? The mist was lifting, and the day was beginning, but Daniel Carter sensed that something had shifted. The dog at his side seemed to have opened a door, and he was no longer sure he wanted to see what lay beyond. Yet, some part of him, the soldier that once leaned into danger instead of away, could not help but wonder, what if Rex had found something that mattered? For the first time in years, Daniel felt the faint stir of curiosity, a spark in the ashes of his weary soul. He straightened slowly, slipping the stone into his pocket. Rex gave a satisfied snort, as if his mission was complete. Daniel rubbed his beard, eyes scanning the quiet forest around him, and whispered under his breath, "Maybe you're trying to tell me something, old boy." He did not know then that this was the first step into a story older and deeper than any he had lived before. The morning mist had burned away by the time Daniel Carter returned to his porch, the strange stone still in his pocket, heavy as though it carried more than its weight. The sun stretched long beams across the mountainside, painting the oaks and maples in shades of green and gold, and the forest was alive with the restless song of birds. Daniel squinted into the light, rubbing at the stubble on his chin, and told himself to forget the oddity of Rex's gift. It was just another day to survive, and survival was what he knew best. Daniel's days rarely differed. He picked up odd jobs when neighbors allowed it, cutting logs, hauling debris, repairing broken shingles. Sometimes the pay was cash, sometimes only a warm meal and a handshake. To most of the townsfolk in the valley below, Daniel was no longer Sergeant Carter, the steady soldier who had walked through fire. He was just a middle-aged man with tired eyes and calloused hands, another drifter who came back from war without a clear place in the world. That afternoon, he hitched a small trailer to his rusted pickup and drove into town. The truck rattled like an old war machine, held together by patches and Daniel's stubbornness. He parked outside a lumber yard where he had found occasional work. The yard smelled of pine and diesel, stacks of timber reaching higher than the chain-link fence. Behind the counter stood Walter Briggs, the yard supervisor, a stocky man in his 50s with a thick neck, thinning gray hair, and a voice made raspy from years of cigarettes. Walter was a man of contradictions, gruff, skeptical of most, but fair to those who proved themselves. He had little patience for laziness, and Daniel had once earned his respect by hauling twice as much weight as a younger worker without complaint. Walter greeted him with a curt nod. "Morning, Carter. Got a delivery run needs handling. Pays 30 if you can drop these boards at the mill down the road." His eyes flicked to Daniel's worn shirt and tired face, but carried no malice. Only the hard measure of a man accustomed to judging workers by effort, not by pity. Daniel agreed quietly, loading the boards with practiced strength. Rex sat in the passenger seat of the pickup, head out the window, ears high, tongue lolling in the breeze. The drive was short, but Daniel's thoughts pressed heavy. He recalled the whispers he'd overheard last week outside the diner, a pair of old men remarking that he was just another vet who couldn't hold it together. The words stung not because they were cruel, but because they echoed fears he already carried inside. At the mill, he met another man, Jacob Miller, the owner's son, broad-shouldered and tall, with short blonde hair and a clean face that shone with youth. Jacob was only in his 20s, confident to the point of arrogance, and he made no effort to hide his disdain for Daniel. "Took you long enough," Jacob muttered, tossing Daniel a clipboard. His hands were unscarred, his shirt neat, his life unmarked by battles or loss. To Daniel, Jacob was a reminder of what he once might have been had war not consumed him. Daniel signed the form without comment, letting the insult roll over him. He had learned long ago that silence was sometimes stronger than any retort. The day grew long. By late afternoon, Daniel returned to his cabin, sweat soaking his shirt, his muscles aching. He set down his small earnings on the kitchen table, a few crumpled bills, hardly enough to cover the week. Rex circled him, tail wagging, then darted toward the tree line, urging Daniel to follow. Daniel only sighed, slumping into the rocking chair on the porch. Yet Rex did not give up easily. With a bark sharp and insistent, he dropped another stone at Daniel's feet. This one was smaller than the last, but smoother, as if carved. Daniel bent reluctantly, turning it in his hand. The edges curved in ways that suggested deliberate shaping, not the randomness of nature. He frowned, feeling the same unease from the morning. Rex's amber eyes watched him closely, tail sweeping with expectation. "Where do you keep finding these?" Daniel murmured. His voice cracked with weariness, but beneath it lingered the faintest tremor of curiosity. As evening descended, he lit a single lamp in the cabin and studied the growing pile of Rex's treasures on the porch. Most were just stones, but 3 now 4 carried patterns too regular, too intentional. He pressed his fingers along the grooves, recalling how in Iraq he had once walked past ruins older than nations, where each artifact had told a story of people long gone. The thought unsettled him. Could the soil beneath these mountains hold secrets too? Sleep came uneasily. Daniel lay on a narrow cot, the cabin creaking in the night wind, and Rex stretched out across the threshold as a guardian. The veteran dreamed of sand and gunfire, of a night patrol gone wrong, the explosion that had thrown him against a wall, the ringing in his ears that never truly faded. He woke in darkness, chest heaving, sweat cold on his skin. Rex pressed against his side, steady and warm, grounding him back to the present. Daniel buried his face in the dog's fur, whispering, "You're all I've got, old boy." The next morning, Daniel decided he could not ignore Rex's findings any longer. He packed a worn satchel, slipped the peculiar stones inside, and prepared to seek answers. But answers were not easily found in small mountain towns. The local library was run by Mrs. Helen Draper, a widow in her late 60s with silver hair tied in a bun, glasses perched low on her nose, and a smile that carried both warmth and a quiet sorrow. She had lived in the valley all her life and knew its stories better than most. When Daniel entered, she looked up from her desk, her eyes softening with recognition. "Mr. Carter," she said gently, her voice like a well-worn lullaby. "It's been a while since I've seen you here. Looking for something particular today?" Daniel hesitated, then placed one of Rex's stones on the desk. Helen lifted it, peering through her glasses, running her fingers over the markings. She frowned thoughtfully. "This doesn't look natural. Reminds me of the old stories. The people who lived in these mountains long before us." She glanced at Daniel, measuring his silence. "You might want to speak with Dr. Sarah Whitfield. She's an archaeologist at the university 2 towns over. Young woman, maybe early 30s, tall, lean frame, hair as black as raven wings. Skin pale from too many hours in archives, but her eyes sharp, restless, like she's always searching for something hidden. She's been studying indigenous settlements in this region. If anyone can tell you what this is, it's her." Daniel nodded slowly, pocketing the stone again. He thanked Helen with quiet sincerity. As he left, Rex pressed against his leg, eager, as though sensing they had taken the first step towards something larger. That night, as the forest outside hummed with crickets, Daniel sat on the porch, watching stars bleed into the horizon. He felt both dread and anticipation. Life had been nothing but shadows for years, work without meaning, days without hope. Yet now, because of Rex, there was a thread tugging him forward. He did not yet know where it led. But he knew this. Tomorrow, he would find Dr. Sarah Whitfield. The morning broke with a silver mist that clung low to the hollows of the mountains, weaving between the trunks like threads of an old tapestry. Daniel Carter pulled his worn boots on, the leather creaking, and buttoned his beige shirt against the chill. Rex was already restless, pacing the porch with his ears alert, his breath puffing in the cool air. Daniel's mind circled the name Helen Draper had given him the day before Dr. Sarah Whitfield. He intended to find her soon, but the dog had other plans. Rex bounded into the fog, tail raised, and Daniel sighed, following him into the trees. The forest floor was damp, scattered with fallen leaves in colors of rust and gold. Daniel felt the ground give slightly beneath his boots, soft from the night's rain. Rex stopped suddenly near a tangle of roots, digging furiously, his claws tearing into the moss. When he looked back, his muzzle was smeared with dirt, eyes glowing with excitement. He dropped something at Daniel's feet. Another stone, this one small but carved with unmistakable grooves. Daniel picked it up, rubbing his thumb along the pattern. It wasn't just chance erosion. It was deliberate. His chest tightened with an odd mixture of fear and wonder. He glanced back toward the cabin, but decided against retreat. Instead, he urged Rex forward, deeper into the forest. They moved along a faint trail lined with ferns, the mist thinning as shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy. After half an hour, they reached a clearing where the earth looked disturbed, as though turned by more than mere weather. The soil was uneven, scattered with fragments of something pale against the dark loam. Daniel crouched and picked one up. It was a shard of pottery, the edges rough, but the surface faintly painted. His pulse quickened. He brushed more leaves aside and uncovered another fragment, then another. Soon he realized he was kneeling in the midst of an entire scatter of broken pieces, each one shaped by hands long gone. He whispered to himself, "This isn't just stone. Someone lived here." Rex circled the site, nose close to the ground, occasionally barking softly as if to alert Daniel each time he found another artifact. Daniel's hands trembled as he gathered a few, careful not to disturb too much. For a moment, the forest felt less like a sanctuary and more like a silent witness, holding its breath as he trespassed upon a story buried beneath centuries of soil. Daniel straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans, and felt the weight of decision pressing upon him. He could ignore this, pretend it was nothing, as he had with so many things in his life. Or he could seek the truth, even if it complicated his already fragile existence. He thought of Emily, her patience eroded by his silence after the war. He thought of the names of friends carved into memorials, of promises he had made to do right when he got home. Maybe this was his chance, however strange, to keep one of those promises. The sound of footsteps startled him. He spun quickly, instinctively tense, but relaxed when he saw a figure approaching along the faint path. A woman, carrying a satchel slung across her shoulder, walked steadily toward the clearing. She was tall, perhaps 5'9", her frame lean, wrapped in a dark jacket against the cold. Her hair was black, tied back loosely, strands escaping around her pale face. Her eyes were dark gray, sharp and restless, as if they sought every detail in the landscape. Her skin was fair, almost too pale, hinting at long hours spent among books or in shaded sites, rather than under open Sunday. She paused when she saw Daniel and Rex. "Mr. Carter?" Her voice carried clarity, calm, but with a curious edge. Daniel's brows knit. "Dr. Whitfield?" She nodded, stepping closer, her boots crunching over leaves. "Helen Draper called me last night. She thought you might have something I'd want to see." She extended her hand, long fingers cool but firm in their shake. "Sarah Whitfield, Archaeology Department, State University." Daniel introduced Rex, who sniffed her hand before sitting obediently. Sarah knelt briefly, meeting the dog's gaze. "Beautiful German Shepherd. 6 years, I'd guess. Strong frame, healthy coat. He seems intelligent." Rex wagged his tail, leaning slightly into her hand. Daniel was surprised at how quickly the dog accepted her. Rex was usually cautious around strangers. Sarah's eyes moved to the ground and the scattered fragments. She knelt, brushing soil gently away with practiced movements. "These are not just broken stones," she murmured. "This is pottery handmade, likely centuries old. The paint residue suggests domestic use, maybe food storage." She looked up at Daniel, her eyes intent. "You may have found a site of cultural significance." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "I don't know what it means. Rex just keeps bringing things like this back." He showed her the stone from earlier, etched with lines. She examined it closely, her brow furrowing. "Worked stone, almost certainly. These grooves were carved. This isn't random." She turned it in her hand, the morning light glinting off its surface. "Mr. Carter, do you realize what you're sitting on here? This could be a settlement site, maybe even a burial ground. It's important." "Very important." Daniel shifted uneasily, the soldier in him recoiling at the weight of responsibility. "I didn't go looking for this. I live here." Sarah studied him for a long moment, her expression softening. "Sometimes history finds us, not the other way around." She stood, dusting off her knees. "But we need to be careful. Sites like this deserve respect, documentation, protection. If people with the wrong intentions find out, it could be looted or destroyed." Daniel's jaw tightened. He thought of men like Jacob Miller, dismissive, arrogant, who would see only profit in these fragments. He felt protective instinct rising, the same instinct that once kept him alive on foreign soil. Sarah seemed to sense his struggle. "I'm not here to take this from you. I want to help you understand what you found. But it won't be easy. There will be procedures, maybe tribal representatives, maybe the state. It's not simple." Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes drifting back to the ground. "Nothing in my life ever has been." For the rest of the morning, Sarah worked carefully, sketching the site, taking a few photographs with a small camera she carried. Daniel helped where he could, moving soil gently, while Rex kept watch, occasionally barking at the rustle of deer in the undergrowth. Sarah spoke little while working, but when she did, her words carried precision. She had grown up in the city, she explained, but an old family trip to ancient cliff dwellings in New Mexico had sparked her lifelong obsession with archaeology. She had pursued it through years of study, despite others telling her it wasn't practical. Daniel found her dedication both foreign and oddly familiar. It reminded him of soldiers who clung to duty even when the world turned against them. By midday, Sarah closed her notebook. "This is enough for now. I'll need to file a preliminary report, but discreetly. No one outside the right channels should know yet. Do you trust me with this, Mr. Carter?" Daniel looked at her, at Rex lying calmly by her boots, and something inside him shifted. Trust did not come easily anymore. But he nodded once. "I trust the dog, and he seems to trust you." Sarah smiled faintly, tucking her hair behind her ear. "Then, that's a start." They parted ways at the edge of the clearing, but as Daniel walked back toward his cabin, Rex at his side, he felt both the weight and the lift of a new purpose. The forest had whispered its secret, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt he might not walk in shadows alone. The cabin creaked as the night settled heavy over the mountains. the old beams sighing with each gust of wind that rolled down from the ridges. Daniel Carter sat at the edge of his narrow cot, boots still on, elbows braced on his knees, his hands rough and scarred. The lamp on the table flickered, casting long shadows on the wooden walls that seemed to close in tighter the longer he stared at them. Rex lay sprawled across the doorway, chest rising and falling steadily, his presence both sentinel and comfort. Daniel's mind drifted where he often feared it would. Back to Emily. She had been more than just a wife. She had been the one piece of his life untouched by battle. Emily had soft auburn hair that fell in gentle waves across her shoulders, eyes of warm green that always seemed to see more than he was willing to say. She was patient in ways he had never earned, with laughter like music in dusty kitchens and hands that smelled of chalk and books from her years as a teacher. She had stood beside him through deployments, through long silences when he couldn't find words. But when he returned from Iraq the final time, a different man. Her strength met its limits. He could still see the evening she left. The rain had poured steady on the tin roof, and Emily had stood by the doorway with a suitcase, her shoulders trembling. "I can't live like this anymore, Daniel," she had whispered, voice breaking. He hadn't begged. Pride and pain had chained his tongue. She walked out into the rain, and the sound of the truck carrying her away was louder than any mortar fire he had ever heard. Daniel rubbed at his beard, sighing into the empty room. The memory pressed against his ribs like a wound that never closed. He sometimes wondered if she had found happiness again, if her laughter still rang somewhere else, in a house that felt like home. He didn't blame her anymore. The war had taken more than blood. It had taken the man she married, and left her with a ghost who jumped at shadows. Rex stirred, lifting his head as if sensing the heaviness of his master's thoughts. The dog's amber eyes fixed on him, steady and unyielding. Daniel managed a faint smile. "You don't leave, do you?" he murmured. Rex rose, patted closer, and rested his head against Daniel's knee, the weight grounding him. The dog had come into their lives during Emily's illness, though neither of them had said aloud that she was dying then. A neighbor had been giving away a litter of German Shepherd pups, and Emily insisted Daniel bring one home. "Something to keep you busy," she had said, her smile tired but resolute. That was 6 years ago. Rex had grown into a powerful, disciplined animal, with a sable coat thick around his shoulders, a strong frame, and a quiet dignity. To Daniel, he was more than a pet. He was proof that loyalty could exist even when everything else crumbled. Outside, an owl called from the trees, and Daniel's thoughts shifted from Emily to the strange discoveries in the forest. The fragments of pottery, the carved stone Rex had unearthed, these weighed on him as heavily as his past. He turned the newest piece in his hand, tracing its grooves. Rex had brought them one by one, never failing, as if driven by some unseen command. Daniel felt a flicker of something he had not dared hold in years: faith. He had not spoken to God in a long time. Too many nights in combat zones, too many comrades carried home in flag-draped coffins. He had cursed heaven more than he had prayed to it. Yet now, in the quiet of his cabin, with Rex beside him and relics of forgotten lives in his hand, Daniel wondered if there was still a hand guiding him. Maybe God did not thunder through the skies or send miracles wrapped in light. Maybe sometimes he sent a dog, stubborn and loyal, to dig where a man refused to look. The next morning dawned gray but calmer, and Daniel forced himself into routine. He walked into town, Rex trotting at his side, ears high and alert. At the general store, he bought coffee, flour, and a tin of nails, greeting the clerk with a curt nod. The clerk, Mr. Raymond Lowe, a balding man in his late 40s, with a round belly and a perpetually suspicious expression, regarded him warily but said nothing beyond, "That all?" Daniel answered with a quiet, "Yes." The town remembered him as the soldier who came back broken, and while some showed kindness, most kept their distance. Daniel had learned to live with the stares, though every one of them chipped away at his pride. On the walk home, he passed the small white church on the edge of town. Its steeple pointed like a finger toward the heavens, paint peeling but bells still intact. He paused, staring at it longer than he meant to. Years ago, Emily had dragged him to Sunday services, her hand warm in his. He had hated the stillness then, restless and impatient. Now he felt the ache of absence, the sense that something larger than him might still be out there, waiting for him to turn back. That night, as the wind whispered through the pines and the fire in his stove crackled low, Daniel opened an old box he hadn't touched in years. Inside were his medals, tarnished but still gleaming faintly in the lamplight. He turned one over in his hand, recalling the day it was pinned on his chest, the applause of comrades, the hollow pride that came with surviving when others didn't. He placed it beside the carved stone Rex had found. One was proof of his past battles, the other a mystery pointing to something older than war itself. Together, they seemed to tell him that his story wasn't finished. Rex lifted his head, ears pricked, then stood and nudged the door with his nose. Daniel opened it, and the dog trotted outside, disappearing into the trees. Minutes later, Rex returned, another stone clenched in his jaws. He dropped it at Daniel's boots with the same deliberate care as before. Daniel knelt, picking it up, and stared at the faint etchings across its surface. He felt the faint stirrings of conviction, fragile but growing. Maybe Rex was more than just a companion. Maybe the dog was leading him towards something he needed, something bigger than survival. He whispered softly, almost as a prayer, "Maybe you're heaven's stubborn messenger." Rex wagged his tail, as if to agree. For the first time in years, Daniel did not feel entirely abandoned. The cabin still groaned, the forest still held its secrets, but faith, small and tentative, had returned. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew he wouldn't face it alone. The morning light crept slowly over the Appalachian ridges, spilling gold across the treetops while mist clung stubbornly to the hollows. Daniel Carter tightened his brown boots and checked the satchel slung across his shoulder. Inside were the fragments Rex had carried back over the past week, stone with carved grooves, pottery shards, pieces too deliberate to dismiss. His mind was restless after the long night, haunted by dreams of deserts and explosions, but something stronger tugged at him now, the need to follow where Rex was leading. Rex trotted ahead, his powerful frame taut with energy, ears flicking at every sound. His sable coat caught the morning sun, muscles rolling beneath as he moved with practiced purpose. 6 years old, but still in prime strength, Rex was more than eager to show the way. Daniel had learned to read the dog's movements. This wasn't aimless sniffing. Rex was tracking something specific, and Daniel, for once, didn't resist. They trekked deep into the forest, past the familiar clearing, and further than Daniel had gone in years. The path narrowed, winding through thick brush and overgrown ferns. Birds startled at their approach, taking flight in bursts of color. After an hour, Rex stopped at a rocky outcrop, where moss clung to stone like a thick green blanket. He barked once, short and sharp, then began pawing at the ground near a dark opening, half hidden by vines. Daniel pushed the greenery aside and found himself staring into the mouth of a cave. The entrance yawned like a black wound in the hillside, cool air drifting out with the smell of damp earth and age. Daniel crouched, his hand instinctively resting on Rex's back. "You want me to go in there?" he muttered. Rex wagged his tail once, then stepped forward confidently. Inside, the cave walls glistened with moisture, streaked in emerald moss. The floor sloped downward, uneven and scattered with loose stones. Daniel struck a match and lit a small lantern he carried, the flickering light chasing shadows into the corners. Each step echoed faintly, the cave swallowing sound. 100 feet in, the space widened. Daniel lifted the lantern higher, and his breath caught. Against the walls lay objects half buried in siltstone tools shaped by human hands, grinding stones and shards of pottery still intact, some painted with faint geometric designs. He knelt, brushing soil gently aside, and found a clay jar unbroken, its surface decorated with spirals that shimmered faintly in the light. "Good Lord," he whispered. His voice trembled, not with fear, but reverence. He wasn't holding random rocks anymore, he was holding history. Rex padded deeper, nose twitching, then stopped near a mound of collapsed earth at the rear of the chamber. His claws scratched at something solid beneath the dirt. Daniel hurried over, lantern swinging. Together, they uncovered a wooden chest, its surface rotted and dark with centuries of decay. Daniel's heart pounded as he scraped away the last of the soil. The iron fittings crumbled at his touch, and the lid sagged open with a groan. Inside lay tarnished silver coins, stamped with Spanish crests, their edges worn but still gleaming under the lantern. Beneath them, wrapped in brittle cloth, were folded sheets of animal hide covered in ink. Daniel lifted one carefully, the texture rough, the script faded but still legible in places. The words spoke of land transfers, titles written in the 1,700 seconds, marking claims from colonial days. His name wasn't there, of course, but the Kavanaugh family name his mother's line appeared faintly in the curling script. The weight of it struck him like a physical blow. This land, his family's land, had once been traded in ink and silver, bought and taken at the expense of those who had lived here first. The chest wasn't just a relic, it was evidence, both of heritage and of theft. A hiss broke his thoughts. Daniel froze. From the shadows near the chest, a snake coiled, its scales dark, eyes fixed on him. Its head rose, tongue flicking, the triangular shape leaving no doubt it was venomous, a timber rattler disturbed from its lair. Daniel's breath shortened, his body tensed. The snake struck. Rex launched forward in a blur, teeth bared, snapping inches from the serpent. The dog's growl echoed in the cavern as he lunged again, driving the snake back toward the wall. Daniel stumbled, lantern nearly falling from his grip, as Rex held the rattler at bay. The serpent hissed once more, then slithered into a crack in the stone, disappearing into darkness. Daniel dropped to his knees, pulling Rex close, his hands trembling as he stroked the dog's fur. "You saved me," he whispered hoarsely. Rex panted, chest heaving, but his eyes shone with fierce satisfaction. Sitting there in the cave, lantern casting faint light over relics and coins, Daniel felt clarity. Rex wasn't just leading him randomly. Every step, every stone, every bark had drawn him toward this moment. The dog was his protector, yes, but more than that, he was his guide. Daniel lifted the fragile papers again, staring at the inked names. A soldier's instinct told him this discovery would change everything, not just his life, but perhaps the way the whole town, maybe even the state, saw this land. But above all, he realized this truth. He had not been abandoned. He had been led. The news had a way of slipping through cracks, no matter how tightly one tried to hold it. Daniel Carter realized this only days after the cave discovery. He had returned with fragments of pottery, the brittle hide documents, and the silver coins, storing them carefully in a wooden chest beneath his bed. He told himself he would wait, gather his thoughts, then reach out to Dr. Sarah Whitfield, the archaeologist who had already shown interest. But Appalachia was a small place, and secrets rarely stayed buried for long. Daniel had driven into town to buy supplies, Rex at his side as always, when the stairs began to feel sharper than usual. At the general store, Raymond Lowe, the heavyset clerk with thinning hair, glanced at the satchel on Daniel's shoulder and asked casually, "Heard you've been digging up treasure in the hills, Carter. Find yourself rich?" The smirk in his voice told Daniel the question wasn't innocent. He paid for his nails and flour, muttered something non-committal, and left quickly. By the time he reached the truck, he knew. Someone had talked. 2 days later, the storm arrived in the form of Jacob Miller. The tall, broad-shouldered son of the mill owner pulled up the dirt road in a shiny red pickup, dust swirling in his wake. Jacob climbed out, clean jeans and crisp flannel, highlighting how different his world was from Daniel's frayed shirt and worn boots. His blonde hair caught the sunlight, and his face, smooth and free of scars, carried an easy arrogance. He was in his late 20s, but walked with the entitlement of someone who had never been denied anything. "Morning, Carter," Jacob drawled, thumbs hooked in his belt. His eyes flicked toward the cabin, then the forest beyond. "Heard some interesting stories. Folks say you found something worth more than that old shack you live in. Thought I'd come see for myself." Daniel leaned against the porch post, jaw tightening. "Stories travel faster than truth," Jacob smirked. "Maybe. But if there's even a grain of truth, you might want to think about selling that land. My family could make it worth your while. No need for you to be busting your back on day jobs when you could walk away with cash." Rex growled low in his throat, amber eyes fixed on Jacob. The young man flinched but covered it with a laugh. "Mean dog you got there." Daniel straightened, the years of military discipline showing in his posture. He doesn't like vultures. Jacob's grin faded, replaced by a flash of anger. "Careful, old man. You don't want to make enemies in this town." With that, he turned, boots crunching on gravel, and drove off in a spray of dust. That night, Daniel sat at his table, the lamplight dim, the papers spread before him. His stomach churned with conflict. Jacob wasn't wrong about one thing: money would solve problems. He could pay debts, repair the cabin, maybe even start fresh somewhere else. The weight of poverty had ground him down for years, and the thought of escape was tempting. Yet the relics told a deeper story, one not his to sell. The etched grooves, the painted pottery, the land deeds signed in another century, they weren't just objects. They were voices from the past, and to cash them in felt like betrayal. Rex padded over, resting his head on Daniel's knee. The dog's steady gaze was unwavering, as if to remind him of promises unspoken. Daniel scratched behind his ears, whispering, "You'd never trade loyalty for comfort, would you?" Rex's tail thumped once, slow and certain. The following morning, Daniel drove 2 towns over to meet Sarah Whitfield. The university campus was modest, brick buildings nestled among sycamores. Sarah met him at her office, a small space stacked with books and artifacts. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, her black hair tied back, though loose strands framed her pale face. Her gray eyes lit up as he laid the objects on her: desk, the pottery shard, the stone with grooves, the brittle parchment. "Daniel," she said, her voice taut with excitement, "this is remarkable. These documents alone, they suggest colonial presence intertwined with native occupation. This could reshape what we know about settlement patterns here." She leaned closer, her long fingers carefully tracing the script on the hide. "And the artifacts, the craftsmanship, the preservation, it's extraordinary." Daniel studied her as she spoke. Sarah was young, perhaps early 30s, but carried herself with confidence built from years of study. Her movements were precise, her words deliberate, but her expression softened when she glanced at him. "You understand, don't you? This isn't just yours. It belongs to history, to the people whose stories are buried here." Her words pressed against the walls Daniel had built inside himself. He remembered Jacob's offer, the temptation of money, the endless grind of survival. He thought of Emily, walking away with her suitcase, telling him she couldn't bear his silence. Was he still the man who clung to shadows, or could he choose something better? Before he could answer, Sarah leaned back, folding her arms. "But there's risk. If word spreads, there will be people collectors, land developers who'll try to force your hand. You'll need to decide now whether to protect this site or sell it." Daniel met her gaze, his own voice rough. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to fight everyone." Sarah tilted her head, her dark eyes steady. "Then, don't fight alone. Let me help. Let's involve the right people, the historical society, maybe even tribal representatives. It will be hard, but it will be right." Daniel felt Rex nudge his leg under the table, as if urging him to listen. For the first time in years, he felt less like a man drifting through life, and more like someone standing at a crossroads. As he left the university, that evening, the setting sun casting the sky in fiery hues, Daniel knew the storm had only begun. The land beneath his boots carried weight older than his name, and the choice before him would test more than his will, it would test the very measure of his soul. The autumn wind swept down the mountains that night, rattling the trees until their golden leaves scattered like fading embers across the forest floor. Daniel Carter walked the ridge above his cabin, the lantern in his hand casting a faint halo against the dark. Rex padded at his side, steady as always, his ears twitching at the distant howl of a coyote. Daniel's mind was a battlefield of its own, haunted not by gunfire now, but by the weight of decisions waiting for him. Earlier that day, Sarah Whitfield had come to the cabin again. She had driven up in her dusty sedan, a notebook balanced on her lap, as she explained the depth of what they had uncovered. Sarah, tall and lean with her dark hair tied back, looked both exhausted and exhilarated. The lamplight caught her pale skin, the hollows under her eyes a sign of long nights spent studying. She spoke with urgency, but also with reverence. "Daniel," she had said, her gray eyes piercing, "this land isn't just soil and trees. It was home. Generations lived here, raised families, and buried their dead. What Rex led you to, it's not only a settlement. The artifacts, the arrangement of stones in the cave, it all suggests burial grounds. This is sacred." The word had struck him like a blow. Sacred. Not just valuable, not just historic, sacred. Daniel had felt his throat tighten. Sarah laid her hand gently over the parchment documents, her long fingers tracing the curling script of colonial names. "And your family's name? It's tied to land transfers that may have displaced these people. That history is difficult, I know, but it's the truth." After she left, Daniel had sat for hours in silence. He had pulled the medals from his old box again, laying them beside the brittle parchments, silver ribbons for courage in combat beside the inked proof of ancestral greed. two legacies clashing on the same table. Now, as he walked beneath the restless trees, Daniel remembered a voice from years past. Staff Sergeant Michael Mick Donnelly, the man who had once saved him in Iraq. Mick had been a giant of a soldier, broad shoulders, and a laugh that cut through even the worst nights. He had a thick black beard, sharp Irish features, and a habit of quoting scripture when bullets were flying. "Live to do the right thing, Danny," he had said one night as they crouched behind a broken wall, tracer fire screaming overhead. "Don't waste your second chance." Mick never got his second chance. A roadside bomb had stolen it. The words had remained, buried under pain until now. Daniel stopped by a clearing where the moonlight painted the leaves in silver. Rex sat beside him, tail sweeping the ground slowly, as if waiting for his master to speak. Daniel rubbed his dog's ears, his voice rough. "What's the right thing, boy? Do I keep it, fix this broken life with silver and land, or do I hand it back, admit my family's sins, and walk away with nothing?" Rex leaned into him, steady and unshaken. His amber eyes seemed to answer without words. Loyalty wasn't about comfort, it was about truth. The following day, Daniel drove into town to meet Sarah at the library. Helen Draper, the elderly librarian, was there as well, her silver bun pinned neatly, her soft smile welcoming, but her eyes sharp with concern. Sarah had brought an additional guest, Chief Robert Yazzie, a representative from the local tribal council. Robert was a man in his late 50s, with long graying hair tied back, a weathered face marked by deep lines, and steady brown eyes that carried both sadness and dignity. He wore a plain-buttoned shirt and dark slacks, his posture upright despite the weight of history on his shoulders. Sarah introduced them. "Daniel, this is Chief Yazzie. He has agreed to listen, to understand what has been found on your land." Robert extended a hand. His grip was firm, but his gaze searched Daniel's face, as if weighing his soul. "Your dog found more than stones," he said, his voice low but resonant. "He found our ancestors, and now you must decide how their story continues." The three of them sat together at a long oak table. Daniel laid out the coins, the pottery, the parchments. Helen watched in silence, her wrinkled hands folded neatly on her lap. Sarah explained the significance, while Robert listened without interruption, his expression carved from stone. When Daniel finally finished, admitting his fear, his poverty, his anger at the unfair burden of choice, Robert spoke. "My people have endured loss for generations," the chief said quietly. "But we also believe in forgiveness. If you honor this land, we will honor you. This is not about blame, it is about healing." The words lodged deep in Daniel's chest. He excused himself after the meeting, stepping into the cool air of evening. The church bell in town rang 6 times, echoing through the valley. He stood there, staring at the fading sky, hearing Mick's voice again, hearing Emily's goodbye, feeling Rex press against his leg. That night in the forest, the wind rushed through the canopy like the breath of unseen spirits. Daniel dropped to his knees, hands pressed into the soil that had hidden centuries of lives. Tears stung his eyes as he whispered to the darkness, "I'll do it. I'll make it right. I won't waste my second chance." When morning came, he called Sarah. His voice was steadier than he expected. "Tell Chief Yazzie, I'll give the sacred land back to the tribe. I'll keep only a small piece by the cabin, enough to live, nothing more. The rest belongs to those it was stolen from." Rex barked once, sharp and sure, as if sealing the vow. Daniel felt lighter, as though a weight that had pressed on him for years had finally shifted. He had chosen not the easy path, but the right one. The first light of morning spilled gently over the Appalachian ridges, turning the mist into a golden veil that clung to the treetops. Daniel Carter stood on the porch of his weathered cabin, his brown boots planted firmly on the wood, the beige shirt he wore loose and frayed at the seams. His hazel hair, streaked with early silver, caught the light, and for the first time in years, his face held something softer than weariness, something closer to peace. Rex sat at his side, ears high, tail sweeping the porch slowly. The German shepherd's amber eyes seemed to shine with pride, as if he knew the new chapter his master had chosen. Days had passed since Daniel made his decision to return the sacred land to the tribal community. The news spread quickly through the valley, but instead of ridicule or suspicion, something unexpected happened: respect. Sarah Whitfield had filed her report discreetly, balancing her duty as a scholar with loyalty to Daniel's trust. She visited often now, her tall frame moving with renewed energy, though the long nights still left shadows beneath her gray eyes. Her black hair, always tied back loosely, caught the autumn light when she arrived to discuss the progress. She seemed more than a researcher now, she had become an ally, perhaps even a friend. One evening, Sarah returned with Chief Robert Yazzie and several council members. They stood solemnly, yet with warmth, around Daniel's small wooden table as he poured black coffee into mismatched mugs. Robert, his long gray-streaked hair pulled back, spoke quietly but firmly. "You have chosen honor over comfort. That is no small thing, Daniel Carter. Because of you, our ancestors will be remembered in peace." His deep brown eyes held Daniel's until the weight of the words sank in. It was not only the tribe who came. A week later, representatives from a veterans support organization drove up the dirt road in a faded blue van. Among them was Sergeant Carl Jennings, a man in his early 50s, with a wiry frame, and a face as weathered as old leather. His short-cropped beard was peppered with gray, and his eyes carried the familiar shadow of someone who had seen too much war. Carl clasped Daniel's shoulder with the grip of a brother. "Heard what you did. You gave back what wasn't yours to keep. That takes guts. We want to help you build something here, something new." And so, the rebuilding began. Lumber was hauled up the road by trucks. Hammers rang against nails. The sharp smell of fresh-cut pine filled the air where once only damp moss had lingered. Men from the veterans group worked beside members of the tribe and townsfolk who had once kept Daniel at arm's length. Even Walter Briggs from the lumberyard came, rolling up his sleeves, his raspy voice barking orders with gruff kindness. Children ran between stacks of boards, their laughter echoing through the valley. Women brought baskets of food, the scent of cornbread and stew drifting across the clearing. Daniel, though awkward at first, joined in the labor. His hands, scarred and calloused, found purpose again in driving nails, lifting beams, and setting foundations. Sweat streaked his face, but he felt lighter, freer, as if each blow of the hammer drove out a piece of the ghost that had haunted him. Rex was never far, circling the site, barking happily at children who tugged playfully at his ears. The dog seemed to revel in the newfound community, no longer just Daniel's shadow, but everyone's companion. One afternoon, Daniel noticed an old woman from the tribe sitting quietly near the construction site. She was small and bent with age, her skin lined deeply, her silver hair braided neatly down her back. Her name, Sarah whispered, was Elsie Two Rivers. When Daniel approached, Elsie lifted her cloudy eyes to him and smiled faintly. "Your dog," she said in a soft, wavering voice. "He carries the spirit of a guardian. Long ago, our people told stories of animals sent to guide the lost back to the right path. You should listen to him, always." Daniel knelt beside her, the weight of her words pressing gently into his heart. By late autumn, the cabin had been transformed into something more than shelter. The veterans and townsfolk had expanded it into a modest homestead, with a sturdy barn, a fenced garden, and enough land cleared to raise a few goats and chickens. A weathered sign, hand-painted by one of the veteran volunteers, hung above the barn door. Carter Homestead. Daniel looked at it with a mix of disbelief and pride. On the day of completion, the community gathered in the clearing. Children clambered over Rex, their small hands buried in his thick coat as he stood patiently, tail wagging. Older men nodded to Daniel with newfound respect. Their once cold stares softened. Sarah stood near the porch, her gray eyes bright with quiet satisfaction. Chief Yazzie spoke a few solemn words, honoring both ancestors and the man who had chosen to respect them. Then Carl Jennings stepped forward, his voice strong. "We all know what it's like to lose things you can't get back. But today, Daniel showed us that some losses can be redeemed, not with money, but with honor and heart." Daniel, standing with Rex at his side, felt the weight of all eyes on him. For years he had been the ghost in the cabin, the broken veteran. Now he was something else, a man who had chosen justice over greed, who had traded loneliness for community. He bent to scratch Rex's ears, whispering, "We made it, buddy. We really made it." Rex's tail thumped against the porch, and the dog lifted his head proudly, the autumn sun shining on his sable coat. As evening fell, lanterns glowed warmly around the homestead. Laughter and conversation floated through the crisp air. Daniel sat on the porch with Rex stretched at his feet, the noise of community buzzing around him. He lifted his gaze to the horizon, where the mountains stood tall, against a sky painted in fire and violet. For the first time in a long time, he believed tomorrow would not bring only struggle, it might bring peace. The dawn had come again, not just to the mountains, but to his life. When we look back at Daniel Carter's journey, it wasn't wealth or power that restored his life. It was love, loyalty, and the courage to choose what was right. In the faithful eyes of Rex, he found direction. In the hands of his community, he found belonging. And, in honoring the past, he discovered a future filled with peace. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive in thunder and fire. They come quietly, through a dog that refuses to leave, a neighbor who offers a hand, or the strength God plants in our hearts when we are ready to listen. Just like Daniel, we too can find healing and new beginnings in the most unexpected places. If this story touched you, take a moment to reflect on the blessings in your own life. Leave a comment below, share this video with someone who needs hope, and don't forget to subscribe so we can continue sharing more stories of faith and resilience. May God bless you and your family with peace, strength, and endless love.